Recording.
Never mind. I was going to make a joke about Diane, but now I'm not going to because we're recording. Okay, awesome. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to do a quick review to sort of bring us up to speed to where we are now and sort of paint a picture of what we've done and where we're going as we go forward. So it's nice to have some of you guys that are not in the Masters Racing program because this will get you sort of the flavor of what we're working on these days. The nuances of where we're going. So that's where the recap part is important. So if you look at this little sheet that I put out, energy systems, previous tech talk on YouTube. Yes, there is one. So if you want to know anything about energy systems, it's in the can, it's been done, no need to repeat it. Just get on YouTube, type in Andy Baxter Tech Talk, and it'll pop right up. That's that. The elements of the stroke, we're going to do a quick review on that now because I know there's a recording, Jennifer or Lisa, of that somewhere, but I don't know where it is. Haven't seen it on YouTube. It might be on the road.
I still have it on my phone. We did upload it to Slack and then they take it down after 90
Yeah.
days. If you want, I can upload it back up again after tonight.
That'd be great.
Okay.
If we could get it on YouTube, then it'll stay there.
I'll ask Jen.
Okay, awesome, thank you. So then there's that one, elements of the stroke. But again, we'll do a quick review on that today. Power mechanics, also on YouTube. So if that one will come up. If you type in Andy Baxter Tech Talks, it'll pop right up. Definitely recommend you watch that one. We're going to go through a little bit of these, are kind of basically the notes from that talk, just to go over some of the meat of what's in there. So when we talk about power mechanics, we're aligning peak force and peak velocity. And without going too much into it, this was an area of study that I was involved in. We actually did a study where we looked at handle speed so that we could measure peak velocity, peak force, and how they were divergent or how they aligned. And then that gets represented graphically, and that's a little more technical, and that's why if you watch the talk, it's already on the board. So I'm not going to try to redo that here. But essentially, what we're talking about, what do those words mean? Peak force and peak velocity. Well, power is load and acceleration. So we're talking about power, but how we apply our power is dependent on biomechanics and boat mechanics. And what we're trying to do as coaches, as athletes, as engineers of the equipment that we use, the tools that we use on the water, is we're trying to get that alignment between the athlete and the boat, where your power is in line with the peak power that gets delivered to the water, right? So that's what that's all about. And then when we look here under boat mechanics, gearing, and rigging, we have all these different variables. So just looking at boats, we have the type of boat, we have inboard, outboard, spread and span, blade design, foot stretchers, and with foot stretchers alone, you have 3 adjustments. You've got a height adjustments, you've got fore and aft, and you've got the angle. And all 3 of those things affect how you're going to apply your power on the water. They make a huge difference. Yeah. So.
Can I ask a dumb question?
No dumb questions. Yes.
Inboard and outboard, can you just?
Yeah. So if we look at an oar, here's my oar. Here's my oar. Everything on the inside of the collar is the inboard, and everything on the outside of the collar is the outboard. And so that affects your gearing tremendously. We actually talk a little bit about, like it's really simple in large programs. If you go to an event and you've got 8s and 4s and pairs, you're going to rig everything based on the 8s, and then you'll just throw clams on the 4s and clams on the pairs. Go 2 clams on the pairs and 1 clam on the 4s to re-gear. But that's a very simple fix because what it doesn't take into consideration is the rig of the boat itself. Because if you're not changing the rig of the boat, all you've done is increase the inboard of the oar. And that creates a different arc that's not in alignment with that rig. It's a simple fix. It kind of works, but it's not the best fix. Right? So, but you do what you can. So, any questions on that? And then we get into oar lock height and pitch. And these are things that typically you're not going to worry about. Your coach is going to worry about that. Or the stuff's going to come from the factory at a sort of a generic preset. We're going to run with that and then make adjustments from there. And that's pretty much how our club operates. Right? So we get our pitches. I think they're all at zeroed out. from the manufacturer a specific setting. So, and that just has to do with depth of the blade, how the blade washes out or doesn't wash out, the grab that it has on the water at the attack, which then if we go back up on that list, we get into blade design as well. So blade design is also going to affect how you grab the water, how much load there is in the back end versus how much is in the front end. So, all important things. Then we get to biomechanics. We have body angle and hamstring, hip flexibility, tib, fib to femur ratios. These are all important as well as how we're interfacing with our tools. And so, obviously, not everybody is built the same. We're all different. So, if we had boats set and lineup set that were fairly consistent, we could change the rig of that boat to accommodate those athletes. But again, we find the most common denominator and we work out from there. So, consistency of patterning and sequencing, that comes with experience and hopefully with good coaching. Correct squat, deadlift, clean mechanics. How we train in the weight room has a direct impact on how we row. This is not the same as saying how I train in the weight room has a direct impact on how I run track and field, or how I train in the weight room has a direct impact on how I play basketball. These are separate skill sets, but coincidentally, Olympic weightlifting biomechanically is identical to rowing. So what we do in the weight room, we can actually translate into what we do on the water. So that's a really important thing. We're gonna, that talk that I can't find that's on your phone, I think we talked about this at that talk, but there's, we're gonna watch a video later of Drew Ginn talking about his take on rowing style, which is what he's talking about. And he mentions Jürgen Grobler, who talks about will it make the boat go faster, and that's the title of his talk. I talked about that in reference to weightlifting, because when Jürgen Grobler, who's the winningest Olympic rowing coach in history, took over the Great British program, he tried to introduce weight training. And the premise was, will it make the boat go faster? Because what Grobler is saying is that if you assume that everybody's the same physiological competence, right? They're all at a high level with very, very little variation amongst athletes at the elite level, and they're all using pretty much the same equipment, you know. So if all conditions being equal, you need to find something else that's going to make you better. And if it'll make the boat go faster, why not try it? And so Grobler decided to try Olympic weightlifting with his athletes. Stephen Redgrave famously said, if I wanted to be an Olympic weightlifter, I'd just go be an Olympic weightlifter. That was his response. And then, of course, he and Vincent became the pair to beat, and they won everything. And these guys were huge. And they were infamous for their weight training program. So that's the biomechanical part of, hey, let's train Olympic-style movements to make ourselves more powerful, so that we're not just relying on the speed component of the power equation, because remember, power is strength and speed. Rowing is a power endurance sport. So we have to be powerful, not just aerobically fit, we have to be strong. And the combination of speed and strength is power. That's our output, that's what we're doing on the water. Okay? So yeah, consistency of patterning and sequencing, talk about that a little bit. The squat mechanics, deadlift, clean mechanics. Sufficient strength relative to body weight. So relative strength is exactly that. By definition, is strength relative to body weight. The term pull your own weight is a rowing term. And that's what they're talking about. Your ability to pull your own weight is your ability to apply power relative to body weight. So if Jenny and I are in the gym, and wait a minute, no, say we're in the boathouse and we get on the ergs, and we pull an identical 2,000 meter piece,
Not likely.
but if we did, then who do you want in your boat on the water? Me or Jen? Jen, because she's smaller. Her relative strength is much higher. She's producing the same amount of power on land, but in the water it's relative to body weight, so she's going to be much faster on the water. And this is why we adjust erg scores for weight. And ultimately why we would sea race if it comes down to it, because ultimately it's what you do on the water, not what you do on the sheet. And that's the phrase, ergs don't float. All right, so power. Sufficient strength relative to weight, that gets us to power versus range of motion. This is a really important one we've talked about over the years, and that is reach for the sake of reach is not very efficient. So if you get up to the catch and your form is good and you're upright, but you decide you want to grab that extra couple of inches, your chest caves in, your shoulders round, your back rolls over, and you've got the extra few inches, but at the cost of losing mechanical advantage. So you're weaker for it. So we want to always be aware and honor power versus range of motion. Sufficient range of motion, of course, we need that, but we don't want to lose power by reaching too much. Which then goes back to hip and hamstring flexibility. Right, Jack?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Notoriously tight hamstring.
Yeah, but notoriously getting better all the time. So, yes. Really good. So, we put this down now and just let's take a quick look at this little diagram here. So, we're going to go through this together. It'll be interactive. We're going to learn so much. Okay, so here is our boat. Our boat is going this way. Here is our catch. Blade goes in the water here. Blade comes out of the water here. This is everything outside of the water. Okay, so once my blade exits the water here, goes around here, and I'll walk you through all these things. So let's say that here's our blade, here's our finish, we're coming out of the water. What do you think a DF stands for? Anybody? I just made this up.
Defined finish.
That's good, I like that. Dynamic finish.
Dynamic.
Yeah, dynamic finish. So what that means is we want pressure on the blade all the way to the very end. We don't want to anticipate the next stroke. We don't want to lay off the pressure in an effort to get the blade out early. Bad things happen when you do that. So we want a dynamic finish at the finish. Yes. I'll just tell you. It's because I made it up in my head. You won't find this in the back of a book somewhere. So I'll tell you, it's exit square, right? So these are the 6 elements of the rowing stroke in my opinion. And it gets cool later, so stick with me. So we want to exit the water square. Really important, especially for you newer rowers. When you're learning the elements of the stroke, taking the blade out of the water fully square is hugely important because as you'll find out in your rowing career is that once you start to add speed, everything gets muddy, right? Stuff starts to bleed into other stuff, right? So we lose our sequencing. And sometimes that's by design, and that's okay. But like anything we learn kinesthetically, we have to learn the elements of the thing before we can put those elements together, okay? So we exit the water square. We clear the water. And when I say clear the water, what I mean is whatever we got from exiting the water square, that height, we're going to maintain that height once we feather the oar, all the way through the recovery. We're not going to let the blade come back to the water because then we're back on the water. What they call that referencing. For referencing water, there's no room for the blade to move freely. It's stuck. It's anchored to the surface of the water, and you have no control over it anymore. Right? So we exit the water square. We use that spacing to clear the water, and we maintain that with level hands. So level hands on the recovery once we've cleared the water, squared up. And then as we go through that recovery, we get our early roll-ups. Right? So as we're recovering, we get early roll-ups. And finally, as we come back up to the catch, we want to get locked on the water. We want to get the blade locked on the water before we begin that drive. Okay? So there's our sequence as it goes from the finish around this way back to the catch. Okay? Now here's the fun part.
You just do it all relaxed.
Yeah, all relaxed. Absolutely. There's no pressure here. I tried to get it down to as few elements as possible. Of the 7,000 elements, here are 6, right? So here's the fun part. As a coach and you as an athlete, if you can commit this to memory, or if you have a little cheat sheet, you can do this yourself. We now look at this, and we're going to look at it the opposite direction. So let's say, well, we'll do all the way through. Let's say, but coach, I'm not getting locked on the water. Why am I not getting locked on the water? Why is my blade not getting in the water before I start my drive, or I'm late, I'm missing water, any of those things? Well, the way we're going to find out is we're going to reverse engineer the stroke. We're going to look a step or 2 steps or even 3 steps behind whatever the thing is that we want to be working. So if I'm not getting locked on the water, I'm gonna go this way, I'm gonna go back to, well, am I getting rolled up early enough? Right? Maybe I am, maybe I'm not, probably not, because you're not getting locked on the water. So why are you not getting rolled up early? Because you're not carrying level hands. Why are you not carrying level hands? Because you didn't clear the water. Why aren't you clearing the water? Because you didn't exit the water square. Why didn't you exit the water square? Because you didn't have a dynamic finish. So it always comes back to here. So, when you reverse engineer the stroke, it's a pretty good place to just start there. Start with a dynamic finish. It sets everything up. And that, in fact, is what we're going to talk about as we go forward, about the finer nuances of tempo. But a good place to start is right there. So any questions on any of those elements, we can dive into this more than happy. Does it all make sense to you?
What do you look for in a dynamic finish?
Power. You want power all the way through to the end, right? So remember, as you're taking the stroke, you're losing mechanical advantage. You're going from big muscle groups to small muscle groups. And, you know, ergometry and training in hydrodynamics, training on water is different from throwing free weights around. That's one of the primary differences between Olympic weightlifting and rowing is when I lift a weight and I accelerate that weight, it's getting lighter because I'm moving it. It's in motion. It's carrying its own momentum. Water doesn't do that. Water doesn't cheat. Water doesn't lie. It's a constant pressure all the way through. So it's a very different animal. So in order to maintain consistency of power all the way through, you basically have to constantly accelerate all the way to the end. Carry whatever momentum you have in the boat as the boat surges past the locked blade on the water. You're sort of pulling your way past to the next catch. You want to carry as much of that momentum as humanly possible because you're losing mechanical advantage as you get closer to the finish. You're going to smaller muscle groups. This isn't as big as this and this. So, yeah, so that's one of them. I want to see a bend in the oar all the way to the finish. Remember that when you get to the finish, even though you may have stopped here, your blade is still working. Right? There's dynamic energy, kinetic energy in that bend in the oar, and it's whipping its way through the water even after you came to the finish, which is why when you watch really good cruises, we'll see later, it even looks a little bit like there's a bit of a pause at the finish because there's still energy being expressed in the blade, even though you've come to a terminus here. Okay?
So can you just walk through it one more time for those of us that are really new?
Yeah.
You're at the finish and we get the dynamic part now, and then the early square.
Or tap down.
Tap
exit
down.
Square.
Okay,
Yeah. So
good.
if you're going to come out, and that's what square blade drills are for, among other things, but it's always a good idea to think a square blade mentality, get that blade out square and clean. Clears the water, then you can feather. And you're going to maintain. So if this is the surface of the water, and this is my blade, once I've cleared the water and I feather, look at the space I create. This space between the water and the blade is what you're going to maintain the entire time. That's the level hands part. So by maintaining level hands after you've cleared the water and feathered the blade, now no matter what I do as I travel, I can roll up anywhere in that sequence and I'm not going to interface with the water at all. If I do this, then I'm rowing figure eight.
We're still feathering on the water. I think that's the difference. But
Yeah.
I'm seeing it in my mind.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying.
You won't do that as you go forward.
As we go forward,
That will be
okay.
something you don't want. Yes?
How do you know when you're at the end of this dynamic finish? Because you don't want us to slow our stroke in the water, but on the other hand, I don't think you want the oar to come slamming into your chest.
I do.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, I want it. I want broken ribs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know, all right.
Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, at 40 strokes a minute, it's not gonna look or feel like that.
Yeah.
But at 18 strokes a minute, it should, you know, you're emphasized. So this brings up a really good point. It's important to understand that what we train when we're drilling and learning these things is like anything else in sport. Either we dumb it down, we load it up, we separate it, we isolate it. We do all these things that are super exaggerated. So when you actually put it into practice, it's not going to be that way. But for in that instance, if I'm rowing at 18 at full power, I'm driving into my body, I'm making contact, and I'm holding that for a long time.
But I'm also kind of leaning back too, so
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
your body's at an angle, even
Correct.
though it's like 11 o'clock or whatever.
Yeah.
It's harder to press down when the rest of your body's in the way. I mean, if I get rid of my belly, that'll help some, but it's like,
Yeah.
your body almost gets in the way, technically.
Yeah, it does, and so here's
Yeah.
here's what's counterintuitive. Think about, if you are in that mindset, and you're right, you know, that's true, right? Because that's part of the stroke. You're swinging over the hips, past the hips, and into a layback position, and hopefully, if you have good core support, you're maintaining a level pull. This is another thing that Drew talks about, not in this talk, but in other talks. So, hold that thought. So Drew Ginn is one of my idols. I really like what he does, what he did as an athlete, what he does as a coach. I followed him forever, and he is now, for those of you that watch Decent Rowing, it's an Australian channel. He's now popped up on there. He's doing coaching stuff on their site now. So and they don't say who he is. He's just some dude in a t-shirt on a nerd, and he's explaining the stuff. But one of the things he talks about is that no matter who you are, what boat you're in, or whether the boat is set for you, when you come up and take the catch, whatever height you establish at the catch, you're going to maintain that height through the entire stroke. You're not going to adjust that height mid-stroke, even if it's not the right height for you, right? For instance, if Hillary's in a seat and it's rigged for her, and then Leah gets in that same seat, her angle's going to be up here. But for the length of that row, unfortunately, until we change something, she's going to pull at that height all the way through, right? So the reason I say that is that in that mindset that you just mentioned of not wanting to get stuck on your body, what you're going to do to accommodate that is you're going to lay off the power. You're going to stop the power short so that you can get out clean, and that's not going to happen. You're going to set yourself up for a crack. Because when you lay off the pressure, what happens? The water hits the back of the blade. You get the blade stuck in the water. You get positive pressure all the way through. Now, there's a drill that we do to prove this, and the drill is full power strokes where you don't take the blade out of the water. You just go until it hits your body. The
Yeah.
blade will pop out of the water on its own. You have sufficient power on the blade, it will naturally come right out when it finishes its stroke. Right? That's allowing the blade to express its energy, and that's the natural consequence. And then the tap down is very small. You don't need a lot.
Okay.
It's a good question. Any other questions? Okay, where were we? We were here.
Level hands.
Level hands. So we're at level hands. So we've established a really simple thing, which is a blade height off the water. Right? Clear the water, we square the blade, that's the distance. 6 inches off the water. Now, when I have 6 inches of space off the water, that gives me tremendous control. I can move my blade freely to balance the boat. If the blade's on the water, I have no control. I can do this, but it's not going to change much, not in a good way, because I'm stuck on the water. And then how are you going to roll your blade up? There's nowhere to go. So we get our early roll-ups, and that gets us back into locking on the water. Now, what we've been working on for the last couple of years is basically this sequencing, focusing on specific things. Exiting square and clearing the water, probably one of the hardest things that I think we as a team have been working on. It's not an easy thing to do, so it's rowing's hard. In some ways, rowing is very simple. In other ways, rowing is really hard. So unbreaking some of these habits early on is a really good idea, because it gets harder and harder to unlearn the more you row, the more thousands of hours you have under your belt. So first year for sure is identifying these elements and then isolating the elements and fixing them, and then slowly putting it all back together again. I think as a club we've been doing pretty well with that. Most recently, we've been focusing a lot on the catch. Let's try it out. I should close that. And so we're going to talk about this, because this can get into the weeds, especially for you new folks, because it's a very, very counterintuitive concept. You didn't know there was degrees of counterintuitive. There are. Very, very is how counterintuitive it is. So that's what this drawing is. So I'm using sweep rowing as an example here. So in sweep rowing, you're 57 degrees. That's the angle you're looking for at the catch. In sculling, you're 65 degrees, so you're much deeper into that. But we're going to use sweep for this. So if our power arc generally is this sort of 45 here, or, actually I did that wrong. It's 90. So if we go like this, more like that. So this is our 45.
So right at the oarlock?
Yeah, yeah, so we're 45 on either side of the oarlock. That's your, what's called a power arc, and that, or the power window. So generally speaking, we're gonna say it's 45 degrees. Now, if the catch angle in sweep rowing is 57 degrees, then what's going on in this extra 12 degrees? Why do we care? If we want all our power here and here, and that totals 90, why do we care about this 12 degrees? And the answer is, I don't know, I was hoping you could tell me. I'm just kidding, no, I know, I'm gonna tell you.
But isn't that where
It's
you,
more power.
you said we don't wanna reach too much also, right? Wouldn't that be reaching into that?
No, so this is just, this is optimal. You can overreach, you can go deeper than this and go a higher rate but to what effect? So the, sorry?
Is it where you put it in and the water is pushing?
Very, very good, yeah, so there is
So
a
that first-
process. Yeah.
Before I'm pushing?
That's right, that's exactly right. So this is what we call slip. And slip is the normal process of the blade entering the water in the same direction that your boat is traveling and slipping outward. Because you want to pull that way, right? My boat's going this way. My blade is going to go this way because that pushes the boat that way, right? But as the blade enters the water, it's going more in the direction of the boat than it is in the direction the other way, or even to parallel. So I'm past that 45, I'm actually pointing towards the direction I'm traveling. So this blade is going to enter the water in the same direction as I'm going, as my boat is going. If I miss water, which most of you do and or will and or have, what's happening is I'm on the drive before the blade's on the water and I'm smacking the water going that way. So I've already missed water. And chances are if I miss enough of it, or if I'm not rigged right, or if the boat's too big for me, which is another common problem in this club, which we'll address next year, then chances are you're going to end up entering the water somewhere in here, or possibly here, or possibly here. And so that's not a good place to be, because now you're already into the power arc before you really had a chance to get your body biomechanically to match up with the boat mechanically. The other thing is that when you miss water, you start your leg drive, you've already opened up your body before you're locked on the water. So by the time you get into the power arc, you're actually almost finished with your stroke. And this is the divergence that I talked about between boat mechanics and biomechanics. And that's why if you go to that talk on YouTube, this is actually graphed out. And you can see these peaks. The example we used was the difference between the displacement, which is the distance that the blade travels, peak force and peak velocity being as much as 63% between the two, versus really good rowing when everything lines up, it's like 20%. So it's the ability to get the blade in the water, get your body in the right position, initiate your power, and then continue to accelerate. Because just as the boat has a power arc, your body has a power arc. And the catch is not the most powerful place. The most powerful place is in the middle, just like in the boat, when you've got your hips involved, when you're swinging through with your body. So yeah. That makes sense. Any questions there?
Well, let me just make sure I got this right. So when you're entering the water then, at your catch,
Yeah.
then your body's still kind of moving forward a little bit.
Yes,
Yeah, I
it
think I
is.
remember learning that years ago. So you actually, that's why you have like a splash, a little bit like
That's
a backsplash.
Correct. Oh, you
Right.
guys are doing great. These are good little
coming
light
good.
bulbs.
Yeah.
Yes, all true, all true. So, one of the things we like to drill a lot is we talk about, you may be going to full slide, but we want to think of that entry as going in at 7/8 slide. So you are still in motion as the blade is entering the water.
Right.
So you're on the rollers, you're rolling up to the catch, but you don't want to get to vertical shins, to a full stop, full compression, and then put the blade in the water, then you miss water, it's too late. So if you think of, if you're at full slide, think of that blade entering the water while you're at 7/8 slide. You're still rolling in. And that gives the blade the time to slice into the water, to slip outward, and while it's doing that, while it's doing this really cool little arc that kind of looks like this, While that's happening, you're closing this distance from the 12 to the 45. And once you get to here, you're gonna be there. And then you're in the power arc and everything's good, right? So it's all about confidence and patience. It's understanding that you don't need to be on the second that blade touches the water. It's actually quite the opposite. You want to allow that blade a chance to set itself up, which naturally means that it has to slip outward before it can push backward.
You might feel that on the board.
Ultimately, yes. Yeah, in the beginning, you probably will not, but in the end, you should. There are drills for that as well. So, yeah, there's all kinds of drills, and they're all backsplash-based drills. So exaggerating backsplash has a place. Your teammates may not like it if they're soaked by the end of the workout, but it has a place. We all know who we're talking about. Yeah, everybody does that. Yeah, and so it takes practice, right? Because you have to match the speed of the boat with the speed of the blade. If you're in too hard, you get a big backsplash. If you're late, you get no backsplash or even a forward splash. We're trying to split the difference. Get a little V splash, that's kind of nice. But that takes a lot of practice. But in the beginning, remember, all of this is variable and we dumb everything down when we train this stuff. So we want to exaggerate it when we learn it. Okay, that was that. Any other questions about that? And that's, if you don't get it, by all, it'll come. Mostly it'll come on the water. What we learn in the classroom rarely translates super effectively until we learn it in our muscles. So, kinesthesia, we got to learn it in our bodies. So that's what we've been working on a lot of recently. And most recently, what we've been working on is tempo, and that's the purpose of this talk. So that's in my opinion, why we're here, or why I wanted to have this talk. So if everybody's pretty cool with what we've talked about to this point, we can go forward, or if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. You good? Anybody need to stretch?
We should always be stretching.
Yeah. Should always be stretching. Okay, so now we get into tempo, and so the tempo is, and I'll just give you a real quick example of this. Is another circle. So if here's my boat, oops, and here's my catch. And that one's toast, so let's go with this one. All right, so here's my boat, it's going that way. All right, there's my arrow, it's going that way. And here's my catch. From the catch, back to the next catch, we're going to say that is, 20 strokes a minute is 3 seconds per stroke.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's right. So we're going to say that's 3 seconds. So 20 strokes a minute, you get 3 seconds per stroke. Now, how we use that 3 seconds is the tempo of the stroke, and that changes almost infinitely within that circle. Within that 3 second period of time, you've got a ratio between your drive and recovery. And you also have a tempo within the recovery itself, and that's what we're going to talk about today, right? So we talk about like slide ratios being like a waltz. It's like a 1, 2, 3, so it's a 2 to 1. So if you think of your drive recovery phase as like a waltz where the drive is 1, 2, 3, 2, right? So it's a 2 to 1. 1 on the drive, 2 on the recovery. Generally, that's one way to think about it. There are different schools of thought on what we want this tempo to look like. How are we going to shape this 3 seconds? Now, the really simple part is the more powerful I am through the drive, from here to here, the faster I go through this section here, the more time I get on the recovery. Right? It's still 3 seconds, but how I parse that out is dependent on how powerful I am through the water. So there's one variable. If I'm really strong through the water, and I'm quick through the water, then I get more of those 3 seconds to spend on the recovery. And how we use that then is do we get to the finish and come out super fast and get into body prep and then slow into the catch? Do we come into the catch and then come out at exactly the same speed and keep an even tempo? That's an easy way to start learning, and that's the way I start most of my athletes, is that because it's a good baseline, is if you treat your recovery as just come out the same speed you came in. So it's an even tempo in to out. Right? Here's my stroke, I come to my finish, I come out, I come away, same speed. No muss, no fuss. You don't have to think about it too much, right? But a lot of folks, some of our, Diane would be a good example. Leslie Clecan, who's not rowing with us anymore, but she's still involved with the club, same thing. They come from like more of a, well, I think like prep schools. Women's rowing in general back in the day were super fond of this super fast recovery where you're coming out of bow almost jerky. And I believe, I think Drew talks about this as well, I think the reasoning behind that is simply that women tended to be smaller than men. They're not as strong as men. So they have to make up for it by getting out of bow really fast. So they run higher rates. So they're changing the gearing. Is that wrong? No, it's not wrong. It's just different. So remember that when we change gearing, a lot of clubs have, a lot of crews worldwide have good success with that. Romanians do really well with that now. They actually rig their boats. So they basically row like half slide at 49 strokes a minute or something. It's pretty amazing. But it's effective for them. It works. But that's another one. So we're describing then those first two. One is the even cadence, coming in and out, same speed. One is to come away super fast and then basically decelerate into the catch once you've gone into body prep. And then the third is the one that I propose that most crews do, or a lot of crews do, and that is to hold on to the finish much longer, come away smoothly, and then accelerate into the catch. So counter to what most of you have probably ever done. And the key to what makes that work is this. The key is your ability to get locked on the water with the blade. So I propose and can prove on the water that you can be as fast as you want into the stern as long as that blade is getting locked on the water at the same speed that the boat is traveling. Even if you're going faster, as long as you don't translate that compression into the stern with the blade still out of the water, there won't be any boat check. And we've kind of been proving this most recently. So this is really advanced stuff, right? And this is something we've been working on just these last few months. I think to pretty good effect. Hillary, would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we've been doing is basically we've been doing a lot of pause drills at the bow to finish, where we're hanging at the finish, and then when we break out of bow, we are accelerating. In some cases, in the drills, as fast as we can into the stern. There's some video on Slack from some of these more recent workouts that shows that, so you can check those out. Yeah, and that's not an easy thing to learn, and I still agree with the idea that when you're first starting, the even cadence is probably the best place to start from, and then we can graduate to something a little more advanced like this.
When you would do an even cadence,
Yes.
would that be 3 seconds on the power and, 1.5 seconds on the power and 1.5 on the back, is
No.
that right?
No, the even cadence has to do only with the handle speed as it comes into the body and comes away. So the cadence of the speed that the handle comes into the body and then the speed it comes away, that's the even part.
So you're only talking about this part?
Correct. Yeah, you can follow it through in the body over. One of the ways to drill that is you don't treat this as the finish, you treat body prep as the finish. So I'm going to take my stroke, come through, there's my finish, and then I roll up. That's one way to isolate it. Yeah, it's a good question. And then also, just so I don't get hung out to dry here, it's also important to know that you're not gonna always drill this way either. We do a lot of slow rate drilling where everything's the cadence is inverted, right? We do a lot of deceleration in the catch because we want to promote body control. This is super advanced. The last thing you want to do is do this kind of work when you don't have good set, when you don't have good body control, because then you're just masking everything with speed and you're not learning shit, right? So it's super important that we know how we learn and how we sequence our learning. Does everybody clear on that? Yeah, so again, advanced concepts, but it is something that we're now introducing because a lot of folks in the club are at that level where this is making sense and it's working on the water.
So how are you not slamming into the catch when you accelerate up like that?
It's a great question, and the key is in the entry. So leading up to this concept, we've been working on our catches, on this whole concept here of allowing the blade to slip before we get on the power. And basically, the blade is absorbing that energy, and it's dispersing that energy outward. And that's how it works.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to explain it. Drew's gonna kind of explain it in his Aussie way when I show this video. It's pretty funny. But, and then there's a specific point, you're gonna see a lot of really good rowing in this video. Mostly Drew and a couple of his partners, some Australian four stuff, some of the Kiwi pairs, all the highest level guys. And, but I'm gonna pause it at one point. There's a semi in the Olympic semis, which they ultimately won, but the semi was way more exciting. And there's a scene, I'll just set it up so when I pause you'll know what you're looking at. But you'll see the Kiwi pair in the foreground and the Aussie pair in the background. And you'll see how severely they are understroking their competition and winning. And it practically looks like a pause stroke finish. It's just so relaxed. It's beautiful. Okay, so that's kind of what I wanted to put out in terms of content for tonight. And if it confused you, awesome. We'll look forward to working on that in the spring.
Let me ask another question.
Yep.
So where you're going to and recommending with this hold the catch and then faster up to, hold finish and faster up to the catch. You're actually you're pausing here, finish. And then start slow, increase speed to the catch.
Yeah, pretty much.
On the recovery.
Yeah, so what we're preaching on the water is you're not, I always say break out of the gates. It's in my head from Jim Deeds. Like, he's always preaching don't break out of the gates. So if we think of, it's horse terminology, but when you're at the finish, you don't want that jerky recovery. You don't want to invert your speed ratio where you're coming out faster than you came in. That's exactly the wrong way to do it. So when we come around into our finish and we hold that finish so the blade can express itself, then we're going to brake smoothly, but it's going to be a very, very aggressive acceleration in the catch. But if we're getting up to 100 miles an hour, we're not going to go 0 to 100. Like it's not going to go 100 all the way to here. It's going to go 0 to 100. Right? So it's got to be a linear acceleration. Otherwise, it will upset the boat.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just for the greenies to know, we are not doing this.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I understand. that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't really want you to. I want you
Right.
guys to learn how to row.
We're learning technique first.
Yeah. And
But it's
so,
cool to know there's different ways to do it.
Absolutely, yeah, and and then that gets back into blade design too. I mean, the blade technology has really come leaps and bounds, and so the equipment that's out there now, you can fine tune a lot of this, depending on the type of crew you have. If you have if you have crews that like to row higher rates, then they can go with a different blade design where maybe they're going to be a little bit lighter in the finish. Those exist. And then if you have big meatheads that just want to, step on it all the time, then you have a really big heavy catch, where all the load is sort of catch loaded. And that's not for everybody, but again, blade design affects that. So, yeah. Okay, I think that's it. I can just keep going around and around on this. Hopefully, I got enough of it out there that'll just make you think a little bit. And then I wanted to show this video of Drew's version of all of this, his take on it, and hopefully you'll understand it. That sound good? Okay.
Let me ask a question, because I think where I rode before, they were giving me almost the opposite on the recovery.
Sure.
Which is maybe typical, I don't know.
Yep, it is, yeah.
Where you don't pause at the finish, you get forward quickly, and then you slow down to the catch.
Yep.
And
Or what, I'll tell you right now, that's what Drew calls, technical terms, stupid rowing.
okay,
So,
now what they said was the reason was that it bounces, if you get your body forward,
Uh-huh.
the boat leans toward the bow and rolls. And I went, okay.
Yeah, that kind of stuff is, nobody wants to upset the boat, right? So we don't want this through the water. We don't want the boat bouncing up and down. And if you have a really violent sort of rocking movement, it'll do just that. It'll bob down into the bow if you have too excessive of a layback. But the same is true if you come out too fast and hinge over your hips, then you're going to bob back to the
Now
stern.
the other way.
Correct. So that type of balance comes a lot from head and neck control, keeping your chin level through the entire stroke. You think about,
Okay.
when you can practice this on the ergs as well, you think about your finishes, you're only going to take a layback that's enough that your core can sustain it and still keep a level head. And you can hold that position for time, and you'll find out very quickly if you're strong enough to do that. So yeah, just
Level head's been consistent in places
yeah,
I've seen.
yeah. Yeah, so again, it's out there, these types of rowing styles are out there, they're great ways to learn, but if we go back to that mindset of if everybody's at the same level, if all things are equal, then this is gonna make you faster because it's allowing the boat to be faster. It's not see, because remember, if I'm against the other guy and the other guy's exactly the same size as me and he's exactly as strong as I am, then our rowing styles are what are going to differ, and our equipment is identical. All things are equal. Then this style is going to allow the boat to travel more freely and not be hindered by the movement of the body, even though it's totally counterintuitive. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So yeah, that's it. At least that's my version of it. So now we'll hear Drew's version. Drew Ginn is pretty amazing dude. He and his original partner James Tompkins who was part of the Orson Foursome, was the most winning Australian four ever. And then they got in the pair, did really well. Then Tompkins retired, and a new guy named Duncan Free came, and then he and Ginn partnered up. And these guys are just insanely competent rowers. Yeah. So let's pull this up here.
Do you want lights dimmed or off?
Sure.
See if I can figure that out. Yeah.
I think it's just the levers. Oh, thank you, might be. No, maybe not. There we go.
How's that?
Is that better? Yeah.
Nice.
All right, cool. Here we go.
Drew Ginn here, just a little audio update. Give you an idea. Simple question was posed, I think, by the British 8 to themselves in 2000, or lead up to 2000, which was how do you make the boat go faster, or will it make the boat go faster? Love the concept, and certainly used it as a bit of a focus point myself over the years, ever since I heard about it. Can't remember who I listened to tell the story out of the British 8 when they talked about that, but it became a fundamental question that they asked themselves. Will it make the boat go faster? Recently had a paddle with a guy called Josh Dunkley-Smith, new kid on the scene, I suppose, in Australian rowing, doing very, very well. Stroked the 4, the World Cup in this year, in Poznan, I think it was. Stroke of the 8 as well. Obviously, there's a lot of young, talented guys coming through, and there's some good guys around who have been in the system for a while, and there's some returning athletes like myself, Duncan Free, and a few others. But yeah, I had a paddle with Josh, and something stood out for me. And it's that thing around understanding what will make the boat go faster. And I find myself regularly debating or disputing with coaches as to the view of what will make a boat go faster, sometimes disputing it with athletes. And you know what, I'm really sick of the lack of understanding as to how you create one boat speed and then how you sustain boat speed. So let me get on my high horse and let's shatter a few myths. Once your blade is out of the water, you have the capacity to maintain speed, if not anything, increase boat speed if you do it really well. Now, there's a cost to that. Give you an idea. say you blade in the water, you drive it through really well, and if we're all equal, we drive through the same speed. We produce the same amount of force, we move the boat the same distance, we exit the blade out of the water, we're all as good as each other taking the blade out of the release, out of the finish. You have one crew, spins the hands away, pops the knees up, rocks over really quickly and gets set onto the feet, and then slows down. You have another crew that allows their hands to sort of flow around the back appropriately, I suppose, without forcing their hands away. Stretch off the back, soft knee break, and then once they've broken the knees, they gradually allow the wheels on the seat to gradually increase rolling speed into the front. Stop it there. If both crews did the same thing, you would have a different effect on boat speed. First crew I mentioned, the effect that they would have once they've released the blades out of the water is an increase in boat speed as soon as the body rocks over and as soon as the knees pop up quickly. You'd have an increase in boat speed right there. Not as high of an increase in speed as the drive, but still pretty substantial. But there's a cost. You increase boat speed there, you now have the weight on your feet, you now have the body set over, you now have the stern of the boat sitting down in the water, and you are now slowing down while you are contributing to the boat speed stopping. And then you're expected to put the blade in the water, again, equal applying force as all other crews, and get it going again. I believe that's the stupid way to do it in rowing. Can be done though. Crew 2 has also exited the water, a little bit more tempered with the hand speed away, a little bit more careful with the body going over, certainly a much softer knee break. As a result, potentially looks lazy, looks to be taking their time. Boat speed doesn't spike once they break their knees. Boat speed maintains. The boat is also been sitting in an optimal plane for longer. And then as they increase the roll into the front, they don't rush the slide, but they do subtly increase the roll into the front. By the time they get to the front, they've got less weight on their feet, less stern down, less wetted surface area. They have a greater increase of speed right before the catch. So they've actually had a speed increase just prior to the blade going in the water. And if they're really good, they can actually pick it up feeling lighter. So, just in one stroke.
I'm going to pause right there. So the thing that he mentioned about wetted surface area, super, super true. And some of the stuff, in researching this a little bit, just watching the Olympic final, not the semi that I mentioned that we're going to see here, but in the final, it's noticeable when you're seeing all the bows. You can see their bow surging out of the water every stroke. It's not staying level, it's actually rising. And so they are decreasing the wetted surface, and they're essentially planing, which is what we want in rowing. Because when you're planing, you're above the water, right? You're not sitting in it, you're higher up out. And then by just continuing that momentum without upsetting it, you manage to stay up above the water. So that's what he's talking about there.
Crew 1 looks better because they look more dynamic. Same speed through the water, but they're more aggressive getting over, and as a result, the boat looks like it wants to take off. Problem is, every time they get out to the front and have to pick the boat up, it's getting heavier and heavier and heavier. It's only a matter of time before they pay a price for that. Crew 2 doesn't look any more athletic or dynamic. In fact, almost looks a little bit slow, a little bit tempered in some way. Now remember again, they've produced the same force, the same boat speed out of the stroke in the water, and on that very first stroke, and that very first recovery, they're going to look like almost as if they haven't been as lively and as athletic. But give it 10 strokes, give it 20 strokes, give it 30 strokes, Crew 2, I guarantee you, will start to get boat speed on Crew 1. Because every time they pick the boat up, the boat speed is actually higher by the time they stick their blade in the water than Crew 1. Now I've watched for years coaches and athletes do this whole hand speed away, force the hands away, force the body rock over, force the knee break, and then slow down. The fear of not being set out front. The fear of not being capable of rowing a front turn without having everything over in place and in complete control. And it's bullshit. So we know from biomechanics, and we know from GPS data, and we know from speed data, per stroke, that by listening to the boat, by being more subtle with the boat, by being careful about the boat, by keeping it in an optimal plane, by also making sure that you optimise the speed at the most appropriate time, which is just prior to going back in the water. Effectively, you have less load on the handle out front, and if you're producing...
This is Eric Murray and Hamish Bond, who kind of took the torch from the Aussies. This is the Kiwi pair. Amazing. Eric Murray, the bow seat, broke the world record for the 60-minute. I think he rode a 134 for an hour. So if you guys are into that kind of stuff. And for his reward, he got a mop.
Using the same force, after a while you're able to maintain that speed. It may not look as fancy, it may not look as polished in terms of hands away and rocking over, but I guarantee to you, crew 2, from 500 metres through 1,000 metres through 1,500 metres will gradually start to move away, and people will marvel at it and go, wow, how are they doing that? They look so easy.
That's Mahe Drysdale.
Their boat feels lighter at the front turn than anyone else's when they do it that way. Now, when you row small boats, you have to learn how to pick the boat speed up. You have to learn how to not kick it out front, in effect. But you can kick it out front if you allowed your boat to accelerate into the front turn versus accelerating off the back turn and slowing down to the front turn.
It's Australian 4, that's Drew at 3C.
So, sorry, would you pause? What does it mean by front turn and back turn?
Good question. So the back turn is the finish.
Okay.
The front turn is up to the captain.
Okay.
So I've watched this in rowing for years. I remember watching lightweight rowing and thinking to myself, you know, they seem to be so patient around the back, and then they always zip forward and catch it on the run, and it looked easy. And that to me looks more athletic and dynamic because they're really backing themselves in from all the way from the finish right the way through. They're backing themselves in with a sequence off the back to say that they will set it up appropriately, and they'll set the pacing of the recovery up appropriately so they actually get the best boat speed out of it. Generally, lightweights can't do it any other way. If they do, they get crucified because they're just not strong enough. But a heavyweight rower, and often a heavyweight coach, will have the notion that our boys are so strong or our girls are so strong, you know, we'll get them to drive more acceleration and get them on their feet and, you know, have it slowing down. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. And I think when you're really dynamic and you're flying along, you've got to have the capacity to have less check on the boat. And you've got to have a greater speed on the boat, carrying greater speed on the boat as you're coming to the front turn.
No, it's not different.
So, it's something I've been thinking about a bit recently, and I've watched a lot of crews, and when I paddled with Josh Dunkley-Smith the other week, I noticed that he was very much doing what all good heavyweights are being taught to do, which is...
Okay, so right in the front there, this is the Kiwi pair, this is the Aussies behind them. I think it'll go into a close-up, but if you just sort of keep an eye on the stroke rating, you'll see how dramatically these guys are under stroking. If you just look at their bodies and how relaxed they are out of bow, compared to these guys who look like they're just really struggling to keep up. Comparatively, obviously, it's all relative.
Get the hands away, get up and over, you know, get that all sorted, and then pace it into the front. Problem is it slows down in the front, and as a result, it gets hard for people to pick the front turn, but it also gets hard to row really good length, in terms of elastic length. And then the other part is, you've got to have a really good engine and be super strong to keep that going all the way down the track. And I think that becomes problematic. So for me, when you're 84, 85 kilos and you're not as strong, you've got to find better ways of doing it. And I certainly look towards lightweights in that regard as a key example.
So that looks like a pretty
The
slow
Australian lightweight
39.
for years I thought was fascinating in terms of how they would focus on
Meaning
setting
it's
up the
very
rhythm off the back,
relaxed.
almost looking lazy at the back, and then letting it flow and catch it on the run. The Danes, interesting enough, when you watch them in 2004 and they're flying along at 40 strokes a minute, they're actually zipping into the front turn. You know, the hands are going away because of the speed of the boat. There's no doubt about that. But they're actually extending all the way to the front, and they're actually increasing slide speed into the front turn and picking it up at 40 strokes a minute. And as a result, you watch them through the 1,500 metres as the crews are getting back on them, and you can almost sort of see how easy they're doing it, and they can push away again. So physiologically, they're probably superior. You know, when you hear about Eskil Everson and all that sort of stuff in terms of what he's able to do. And when we say superior, we're talking superior by like 0.5%. We're not talking superior by like 5%
See the
or 6%.
difference in stroke rate?
So if he's 0.5% superior, but they're also looking after their boat speed, not because they're rowing with what looks easy, but because they're still creating good boat speed by being efficient. They gain 1% that way, and all of a sudden you've got Olympic title after Olympic title for crews like that. So for me, I look towards the lightweights. I think they're a fascinating example of how to look after the boat, how to listen to the boat, how to feel for the boat. I very rarely look at heavyweights and think to myself that's inspirational for whatever reason. But I did watch the American 8 in 2004 and really enjoyed what Brian Volkenheim and all those guys were doing in that particular crew, and marvelled in particular at one, they looked strong through the water, but how they looked like.
So notice we're at the 1,000-meter mark here, and the Australians are just in front, but not by much. And you probably noticed prior to that, the Kiwis were actually in front there for a little while. So they're not getting unsettled. They're not changing their plan. They're just really relaxed. The 39's working for them, and they're just doing their thing. But when you see the side-by-side rowing, at least to my mind's eye, one looks very frantic, and one looks very relaxed and long in control. And the actual differences in rate are not that different. It's the tempo within the stroke that's different. I imagine the Kiwis are a beat or two higher, but that's not a huge difference. But visually, it looks very different.
And is it less stressful for the rowers?
I think so. I mean, you're making the boat work for you, not against you. You know, you're letting the boat run.
Recovery. And if you compare that to American crews through 2000 and 96 and all that sort of stuff, what a complete contrast.
Almost like a pause at the finish.
So the athletes there, and all of a sudden, through Mike Tatey and the athletes, and maybe the way they were thinking about it, but all of a sudden starting to really understand that they can produce 500 metres and 1,000 metres of raw speed as good as anyone in the world. They've been able to do that for years. But getting the rhythm right meant that all of a sudden they were producing that raw speed, and they could actually row away from the field and stay away from the field, which is pretty amazing. I also believe watching the Canadians in the 8s in 2008 in Beijing, and obviously they've been through the whole experience of winning lots of world championships as well. But watching them in that particular year, and all of a sudden the front turn, in many respects, looked like they were carrying much better speed through the front turn than all the other crews.
Wow. See that?
And although they looked dynamic around the back, and although they looked like they were really doing a lot of work,
Wow.
So now they're at 42 and they're going slow.
We're still pretty patient, and as a result, the rest of the flow from the knee break onwards to the front turn
And the
is
Aussies are
pretty
just getting
consistent
longer.
with that sort of slide speed idea that I've been mentioning just then. I also look at sort of things like sculling, and it's a fascinating thing to watch guys like Mahe Drysdale and Olaf Tufti and all that sort of stuff. And then you even go right the way back to Perty Karpinen and Peter Michael Colby and stuff like that. And you just watch some of those crews and you go, they've got the raw physical capacity, but what they're often doing when they're racing is they're not killing boat speed. They're not forcing the issue off the back and then slowing down. I think that's a really important thing to understand as coaches and as athletes. So for me, it's my pet hate. I really get frustrated when I get told I've got to spin and get my hands over and get my body over and get set early and all that sort of stuff. I'm always happy to try and do it. But deep down inside, I fundamentally don't think or don't feel like it's conducive to producing the best boat speed at race pace. So going back to the 2000 question that the Poms had for themselves, will it make the boat go faster? I think if that question was asked more regularly, and if that question was measured more regularly and understood better, we'd start to see a different look of many, many crews that potentially scratch their heads sometimes and wonder why they don't get certain results. For me, it's about coming back to that question, about exploring that question, and about being disciplined enough to gather your own data, your own evidence on making sure that if you believe it makes the boat go faster, and you believe that it makes the boat go then you've got a recipe for success. And I'm pretty much sure that most crews that have found the answer to that have usually gone on and had success that they've wanted to have, or got consistent results over a long period of time. World Championships and Olympic Games. So, for me, the dry phase is the dry phase. We always work as hard as we possibly can. How we meter out the forces, obviously, there's subtleties there. But the recovery phase is what makes the difference between first places and sixth places in a field. Between crews that continue to get good results and crews that somehow struggle after 1 or 2 seasons. Anyway, there's my 2 bobs worth. I'd like to see people looking after the boat speed more. That's what I'm going to be focusing on going forward in the future. Until next time, enjoy.
Okay.
So can you just recap, so what they were, it was very relaxed looking rowing, you wouldn't think they were going 38 strokes per minute.
Yeah.
So they were coming into the finish, and then even coming out, and then just very incrementally accelerating into the
Correct,
catch, but
correct.
not slamming,
No, not at all.
and
Not at
just
all.
sort of like riding a surf.
Yeah, and at these higher rates, it actually even looks, because they're already rowing so fast, it even looks more relaxed.
Yeah.
Because you can get away with a lot of speed at those kind of rates, like so.
Okay.
I think the idea, if you look at the finish, as almost like it looks to me like they're actually pausing.
Yeah.
And for the Olympics, I've told this story before, but you can find it on YouTube because the audio is fantastic. For the Olympics, James Tompkins, who was the original pair partner for Drew, who retired, I think he had an injury, but he retired. They invited him into the booth, and so he commentated for the Olympic final. And he tells this story that he said, yeah, while all the other crews, all the other coaches were preaching this fast into the catch, he goes, our coach told us to take a nap at the finish. So it almost like you get there and just kind of, and then go. It's like you really accentuate just hanging onto that back end, and then just organically come out and accelerate the catch. But you can't do any of this without a really solid catch, right? Otherwise it falls apart. And of course you can't do any of this without rowing well to begin with. And how do we learn to row well? Well, we don't learn by training this. We learn by training fundamentals and controlling our bodies when the blade's off the water. Gaining boat control, gaining body control, and that interface between the body and the boat, hugely important. Sometime I'll show you a video of Steve and I rowing a pair at 8 strokes a minute with our blades off the water. And when we went to the trials, we had posted all this stuff on YouTube, and so we got to the trials, we were at Princeton, and some of the women's team were there, and they were doing the same thing. So we were watching the women's pairs out on the water rowing 8, 9, 10 strokes a minute. And they got off the water and we're like, that was awesome, guys. And they're like, yeah, we saw you on YouTube. You guys do it too. That's what you're going for, right? It's like anything in sport. Anything that's, you need to gain control over the elements before you add speed. You can't learn speed until you have the basics. What do we always preach? We preach pattern before strength before power. And with power comes speed. So, gotta get the patterns, get the sequencing, get the strength, get the fitness, all of that stuff being equal, then we add acceleration. Groovy, man.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching, guys.
Yeah.
Any other questions?